I built this garden office for under £800. Unfortunately, I didn't record the process at the time as it was over a year ago before I started the channel, but I did take plenty of photos, so I'll walk you through it step by step. The project started with a pond. While it was a nice feature, it wasn't practical for our family, so it had to go. Removing the pond turned out to be a much bigger job than I expected, but I managed to get it done. I even sold the rocks and pond setup afterwards, which helped me recover about half the cost of the build, although I haven't included that in the budget here. I used the leftover soil from the pond's edging to fill in the hole, but still had quite a lot to spare. My local tip charges for disposing of this type of waste, but I was able to give it away quickly just by listing it online for free. You're probably wondering how this office is so cheap. The reason is because I started with this. A summer house that was previously used to house a hot tub. I bought it for just £150. The floor was rotten, but that didn't matter since I planned to replace it with a sturdier insulated base anyway. I initially planned to use concrete, but it's costly and labour intensive. Timber crossed my mind too, although it tends to rot over time. Then, during a chat with my neighbour, I was introduced to gravel grids. Sturdy plastic panels that interlock and are filled with gravel. Though for a solid, low-cost base that's quick and easy to install. I used them to outline the area, then dug the ground so the top of the grids would sit roughly level with the surrounding surface. To get it as flat as possible, I used some sharp sand I had laying around to help with levelling. After that, I laid down some heavy-duty weed membrane, placed the grids on top and filled them with 10mm pea gravel. Using a piece of timber and a spirit level, I double-checked the surface and made final adjustments to ensure everything was perfectly level. I planned to insulate the base with 100mm PIR, and after some searching on Facebook and a 2-hour round trip, I managed to pick up a batch of £50, with the hope that it would be enough to cover the entire room. Next, I turned my attention to building the base frame. I needed some 5x2 timber as it would provide enough depth for the insulation along with a small air gap. Once again, I found a used batch on Facebook for £30. To get the sizing right, I used the old base as a template. Constructing the frame was a bit tricky. Making sure all the measurements were accurate and everything was square took some time. With the frame finished, I installed the insulation, laid down the leftover flooring from a previous project, and wrapped the excess weed membrane around the base for added protection. I painted the shed panels separately for easier access, then began assembling the structure and replacing the roof felt. The next step was installing the insulation. Initially I planned to use the 100mm PIR boards I had already purchased, but I quickly realised they would take up too much valuable space. Instead, I decided that 40mm insulation would be a better fit, as it could sit neatly in between the battens, allowing me to plasterboard directly over the top. Rather than taking the sensible route and buying the 40mm PIR, I decided to try and save money by cutting down the 100mm boards. This turned out to be incredibly messy and time consuming. In hindsight, I should have just bought the right size to begin with. While I was at it, I also used some old cables I had laying around to run wiring for a few sockets and a light. Still, after a lot of hassle, I finally managed to get all the insulation in place. I then added a vapour barrier over the top to prevent any moisture from reaching the insulation. This was fairly straightforward to install using a staple gun. Next I moved on to the plasterboard. I managed to source some cheap offcuts through Facebook Marketplace which kept the cost down. The walls were relatively easy to board, but the ceiling proved more difficult due to its shape. Ideally, I should have added some additional battens to ensure no gaps exceeded 600mm, as some sections were much wider and this caused a bit of sagging in the plasterboard. Once everything was secured, I began plastering the walls, a skill I picked up a few years ago doing a weekend course. While I'm no expert, it's good enough for my needs and saves a lot of money, as the plaster is the only real cost. With the heat and space acting like a greenhouse, the plaster dried very quickly, making the job quite challenging. However, with some sanding, the finish was decent enough for me. Once the plaster had dried, I began painting. After that, I connected the electrical components and installed a light. The final stage of the project was laying the flooring. Having used Antico before and being very impressed with it, I searched online to find some leftover material for just £30. Unfortunately, I wasn't as lucky with the adhesive and had to buy that at full price. Once the skirting was fitted, it really completed the space nicely. I've now been using this office for over a year and couldn't be happier with it. It's watertight, retains heat well and provides the extra space I needed without costing a fortune. Overall, I'm really pleased with how it turned out. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video or found it helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up or leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts or any questions you might have, and subscribe to the channel for more projects like this.